It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Helter skelter, helter skelter, it always ends with a dull thud. The question is, for whom? Well, Trump has blinked first. In the carnage of the international stock markets, Trump has postponed for 90 days his ludicrous tariff wars, except for China, where he's gone nuclear, and the Chinese have just deployed a nuclear response. I'm talking about financial nuclear power, but it might well lead to a shooting war. Having dodged World War III in the Ukraine and seen Trump begin at least to look like he's backing off World War III in the Persian Gulf, we may be headed to very troubled waters in the South China Sea, in the Straits of Taiwan. We have got two of the biggest guests assembled anywhere on television in the entire world tonight. Judge Napolitano and Professor Richard Wolff on this, of all nights. It is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
You remember that crazed Beatles song that was driven by psychotic, drug-taking adventures called Helter Skelter? It ended with the thud of the Sharon Tate mass murder episode with Charles Manson and his crew. It always struck me as a satanic song. It always struck me as a song that was leading us down a helter-skelter to disaster. That's how I currently feel about the world economic and political situation. It may very well be that we have dodged World War III in the Ukraine, but the Europeans are doing their best to make sure that's not so. It may very well be that Donald Trump intends to make the deal. It is his leitmotif, after all. with the Iranian government in Tehran, although Israel is doing its best to make sure that isn't so. And Donald Trump has, like Liz Truss before him, having wrecked the economy, had to make a spectacular, screeching U-turn, the kind of U-turn that the currently unsellable American cars find it very difficult to make. After promising condign tariff punishments all over the globe and being met by stiff resistance from some and less than stiff from others. How did Vietnam get to be in such a supine state vis-a-vis the United States? After all that sacrifice, I find myself unavoidably asking. But the big enchilada is that Trump has not just doubled down, but I've lost count now of the multiples. The last time I looked, though it is changing, last night, it changed from above 100% tariffs on China. I think it was 104. It has half that number again has now been added to the US tariff on China, and China has responded with 184% tariffs on American goods and services coming into China. It's almost unimaginable, and we're lucky we've got Professor Richard Wolff, one of the world's greatest economists, to help us through it tonight. And as I said earlier, we have one of the wisest men in Christendom, Judge Andrew Napolitano, a former Superior High Court judge in New Jersey, and a man who really should have been nominated by Donald Trump to the US Supreme Court. But Donald Trump often does things that harm himself and fails to do things that would have advantaged himself. I don't know who advised him that setting off a series of trade wars and tariff wars across the globe, just as he was steaming the aircraft carriers and battle groups into the Persian Gulf, just as he was assembling the B-2 bombers in Diego Garcia and in Qatar, and threatening the world with all-out war against the Islamic Republic of Iran, just when he was failing so far to bring about an end to the Ukraine war. It was a good idea to go to trade war across the globe, even including his closest allies, one of whom is referred to in our poll this evening. Will Trump get Greenland? Who cares? Frankly, is my own attitude to it, and Greenland is the least of our worries. But that's merely a benchmark as to how far we've gone in just 3 months of the Donald Trump presidency, because Denmark is one of America's most slavish, obedient allies, and Donald Trump is openly threatening to invade them, sever them asunder, and steal a very significant and important part of their national territory. He's not proposing to buy it, not like the Gaza Strip. Oh, wait, cancel that. He's no longer going to buy the Gaza Strip. He is merely going to have it. It was an interesting choice of phrase from Donald Trump, sitting next to his amanuensis, or is it the other way around, Benjamin Netanyahu, in the Oval Office just this week. He said, we're not going to buy it, we're going to have it. And when asked by a journalist, under what authority? He said, under the US authority. He praised Netanyahu for giving up this wonderful oceanfront real estate in the interest of peace. He does not appear to know that the Gaza Strip has never belonged to Israel, that it is illegally occupied territory. And if he has it, as he says he's going to, he will be the illegal occupier of this wonderful real estate property. And by the way, the Mediterranean Sea is not an ocean, Donald. You have a lot to learn about the world. You have a lot to learn about geography. You have a lot to learn about history. You praised Erdogan and Turkey, as you call it. You praised them in front of Netanyahu in the Oval Office for having been the first people in 2,000 years to take over Syria, which rather ignores the fact that Turkey owned Syria for more than 400 years until the end of the First World War, and that then France took over Syria between the end of the Second World War and the eventual attainment of Syrian independence. So he doesn't know much about history. He doesn't know much about geography. I don't know how that song goes. Trigonometry, how are you with that, Donald? Well, you're about Liz Truss levels of economic management so far. Now, there may be method in all this madness. I'll be the first to admit I'm not the Nobel Prize winner for economics. But I do know this, that when the stock market of the United States loses $14 billion worth of wealth in just 2 days of trading, and when the virus of what you have released into the atmosphere spreads to all the stock markets of the world and all the shareholders, pension funds, and all the others who depend on rising stock markets are losing untold, uncountable hundreds of billions in wealth, you've probably not made the wisest decision. And when it's predicated upon forcing people to buy American goods, you run up against an immediate problem that I highlighted in the week and have been harvesting ever since. What is it exactly I'm supposed to buy from the United States? I buy Netflix. I'll grant you that. I buy internet services, possibly, although my telephone was made in China, and although my Netflix could be dispensed with if I really wanted to. The truth is, I can think of virtually nothing that I want to buy from the United States. Not fashion, thank you very much. I go Italian, me and Judge Napolitano. Not food, chlorinated chicken doesn't make my taste buds salivate. Not cars. Once upon a time, yes, in the 1950s, in the 1960s, before it became uneconomic to do so, I'd have probably thanked you for a Ford Mustang. I probably would have thanked you for a Buick or a Cadillac. But none of these things are practical any longer. And if you're offering me a Ford as opposed to a Mercedes or as opposed to a Volvo, I'm afraid I'm spoiled for choice on this side of the Atlantic. Trump seems to believe that the reason there are virtually no American cars on European streets is because of tariffs. But it isn't because of tariffs. It is that you have gutted your entire country of its industrial strength. Not you personally, though you didn't do as much about it in your first term as you claimed you were going to do. But American rulers for a century have been deindustrializing their country. And that deindustrialization is not the fault of the countries to which your capitalists exported their productive plant, machinery, and operations. Let me give you a very obvious example. I'm wearing black Levi 501s. That's no surprise because I do that every day. Not the same pair, but every day. Even in Parliament. I never entered Parliament without black Levi 501s. Scott Ritter, my good friend, leapt into the fray to say, we make Levi's. But you don't, Scott. I had to educate Scott. Levi's stopped producing their product in America in 2005. And only their high-end products continued to be made there until 2020. Now, Levi's produces nothing in America. So you see, even the iconic American brands are all produced elsewhere. And they're not coming back, because you can get somebody in Indonesia or in Thailand or in Vietnam to sit at an assembly line and sew pairs of Levi's for very low wages. You will not get the American workforce to do that. That is just a matter of economic fact. So much for the economic front. What about the war front? Well, leaving aside Trump's lack of geography and history and trigonometry qualifications, he doesn't seem to know what he's doing on the military front either. He spent $250 billion firing rockets at Yemen, moving military assets towards Yemen, the poorest country in the world, where the fighters, the warriors of Yemen, are still carrying the weapons that they've carried for millennia in some cases and for a century in others. They live in the mountains. They fight from the mountains. They, like the Vietnamese before them, are deep underground in tunnels. They are deep underground in caves. Trump seems to imagine that the use of vastly expensive, lethal firepower, fired from platforms that are themselves floating, sitting ducks, is the way forward in an irregular war against a guerrilla adversary, as if he never heard of Afghanistan, as if he didn't know that the United States was driven out of Afghanistan for precisely those same reasons. That kind of American warfare didn't work against the Vietnamese, didn't work against the Afghans, and sure ain't going to work against the Yemenis. Now, it may very well be that the Yemen front was all merely, how shall I put it, a proxy war to terrify the Iranians. But that too, if so, has singularly failed. The Iranians are not terrified at all. The Iranians would rather die than bow the knee to Donald Trump. Donald Trump above all, the man who cold-bloodedly assassinated the hammer of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, General Soleimani, just in his last term. The Iranians are not afraid of the Americans. The Iranians are more than capable of fighting back against the Americans. Certainly far more capable than the Taliban, far more capable than the Viet Cong. They are a ballistic superpower. They are a drone weapon superpower. And guess what? Their two closest friends, Russia and China, are nuclear-armed superpowers too. The biggest amount of Iranian oil ever was sold by Iran to China this week. Iran is a super important ally and friend of the People's Republic of China. Ditto the Russians, who've just sent their latest MiGs to Tehran, have already installed their electronic warfare capabilities to Tehran, already given the S-20 anti-aircraft batteries long ago. The Iranians are now expert at making them. The Iranian drone technology is so good, people are queuing up to buy it from all over the world. So if you're going to attack Iran, it is a very spiky porcupine indeed. And the spines will not just hit the United States personnel on the ground, strewn out across the region in military bases, but will have devastating effect on the United States' closest friends and allies in the region, and will bring oil and gas production in the entire region to a halt. Now, oil has already fallen to $57 a barrel on the back of the fears of recession. Not so much fears, certainty of recession caused by the current instability in the world economic situation. But you will not be able to get any oil at any price. You won't be able to get any exports of gas at any price if the balloon goes up between the United States and Iran. Now, on that subject, I come to Benjamin Netanyahu. Marco Rubio issued a pronunciamento this very day, at least I saw it this very day, in which he said, Israel has never had a better friend in the White House than Donald Trump. I replied, that's not quite the recommendation that you think it is. And lo and behold, new polling evidence proves that for the first time ever, the majority of US adults disapprove of the United States relationship with Israel. 53% of US adults said yes to the question, do you disapprove of the United States relationship with Israel? This is a seismic and significant shift. And it's a shift that has taken place despite the total blackout of any countervailing narrative on the Israel-Palestine question available on any mainstream media in America, which shows that social media is the king in the United States. For that is the only possible explanation for the fact that more people, more than half the people in the United States, no longer fancy Israel much. But Donald Trump has gone all in for Benjamin Netanyahu. And it makes you wonder why. I know people say it's because of Miriam Adelson and her husband before, but look, we Irish have a saying, eaten bread is soon forgotten. Adelson's donation has already been spent. Her husband's already spent in the first term. Trump isn't running again for president. He doesn't need any more donations from anyone. Anyway, by the end of this presidency, he'll be as rich as Croesus unless he's got it all in the US stock market. So it's not, for me, entirely explicable by donations, by campaign finance contributions. I think it's something deeper and darker than that. I think Donald Trump has been Jeffrey Epsteined. Discuss, I will, with Judge Andrew Napolitano right now after this short break. Stay tuned. Big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website. Thank you very much, all of you. And I'm really going to make this point as firmly as I can. Every one of you has to go to MOATS.tv and donate something, even if it is £1, even if it is $1, €1. Nothing comes for free. 2 shows a week cannot be produced for free. We need every person watching to donate at least £1, $1, €1. I can't put it more clearly than that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, 18,000 people have voted on tonight's poll. Will Trump get Greenland? I know, it's a bit of a Disney question now, given everything that's happened since the poll was coined, but it would still be worth having your point of view. Let's get that above 20,000 toot sweet. Will Trump get Greenland? You can answer on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please make sure you've subscribed to the YouTube channel and given the thumbs up to the show, which helps us in our perennial struggle with Mr. Algorithm. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada, which are still, I think, separate countries. It's +1 844 944 3344, and it's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland. 0808 196 5522. The worldwide number is 0044203962625. Now, His Eminence, Judge Andrew Napolitano, is the host of Judging Freedom, a must-watch podcast, and he's a former New Jersey Superior Court judge. And I saw someone lamenting the other day and concurred. A great pity that, it was Roger Stone actually, a great pity that Trump had not appointed Judge Napolitano to the Supreme Court. But in that event, he wouldn't have been here on the mother of all talk shows. So it's an ill wind that bears nobody any good. Your Honor, Judge Napolitano, wonderful to see you again. I wonder if we could start with the turmoil on the economic, financial front. Is there method in this madness, or is it just madness?
I wish I could understand the method to the madness, George. And let me actually start by thanking you for inviting me to the show. We've been friends and collaborators for a long time. You were on my show recently. Yeah. The numbers went through the roof, the numbers of viewers, and I'm happy and thrilled to be on your show with you. I've been a fan for many years, as you know, before we actually met. I don't know if there's a method to his madness. In my view, and in the view of most legal scholars who've looked at this, what he did was absolutely unlawful and totally unconstitutional. The Constitution authorizes the Congress to raise taxes, not the president. A tariff is a sales tax. Okay, they gave him authority to impose this tariff in the case of an emergency, and then they defined emergency as a sudden and unexpected event which adversely affects national security or economic prosperity. The so-called emergency was stated by Trump in his executive order, George, was the American imbalance of trade. That's been the case since 1934, so it's hardly a sudden and unexpected event. So there's no legal basis for what he's doing. Can the Congress impose tariffs? Well, yes, it could, but that would be after a great public debate in which the Congress made prudential judgments about how to manage the government's economic woes. When the president makes a wild decision like this on his own, and it causes the loss of 6 to 7 trillion in shareholder value, although, as you know, some of that is now coming back since he, in the past half hour, suspended the tariffs that he imposed last week on all countries except China. It makes one wonder if he understands economics 101. I say this as a friend of his, and if he knows what he's doing.
Yes, and this show was happy that he, rather than Kamala Harris, became the president. So we don't depart from a standpoint of wishing him failure. To the contrary. But he's doing his best, Your Honor, to disappoint, if not to shatter, the hopes that so many people had on this front and on the war front.
Yes, on the war front, about which you spoke right before the break, with respect to Israel, in my view, he is worse than Joe Biden. He has totally and completely unleashed Benjamin Netanyahu to resume the genocidal slaughter of the Palestinian people. Moreover, I'm of the view that the statement Trump issued, which was interpreted by the BBC and by The Economist magazine as a disappointment to Prime Minister Netanyahu, was a head fake. intended to lull the American people and the Iranians into a false sense of security. Netanyahu's domestic problems are over the top and out of control and will consume him, and he knows it, unless he brings Israel to war. And he knows that he cannot bring Israel to war without the United States. Now, that raises a whole host of other problems that involve a couple of fellows named Putin and Xi, and it depends on how smart Donald Trump is as to whether or not he goes along with what Netanyahu desperately needs. But he cannot call himself a man of peace. He is still funding the war in Ukraine. It will stop in 2 weeks when he turns off the spigot that Joe Biden opened 3.5 years ago. And even worse, he's paying for 100% of the slaughter in Gaza. What kind of a man of peace is that?
Indeed, the whole shtick that he was hoping for a Nobel Peace Prize and so on, it all seems so long ago now, and he's only been in 3 months. It is quite an extraordinary turn of events, and not entirely explicable to me, because I got the feeling before that Trump didn't like Netanyahu very much. Trump's an alpha male, obviously, and he tends not to like the being in the presence of other alpha males. He tends to like people like little Macron that he can pat on the head and push around. And Netanyahu is, of course, not that kind of guy. So I got the feeling that Trump would not actually go the extra mile for Netanyahu. But in his ravings about Gaza, and they are ravings, I mean, the ravings in every sense. When he says Israel gave up the Gaza ocean front property, the Mediterranean being a sea, not an ocean, and Israel never had it to give it up. It is, as you well know, Your Honor, internationally, legally recognized as occupied territory, a status only recently reinforced by the last judgment of the ICJ, the highest court in the world. He seemed to think that he, under the authority of the United States, could simply have the Gaza Strip, when legally all he'd be doing was making America the illegal occupier rather than Israel.
His statement in the Oval Office in the presence of Prime Minister Netanyahu that Israel gave up the Gaza Strip probably galled Netanyahu as well, because it is so profoundly inaccurate. It's been Palestine for about 4,000 years. The Israelis have attempted to seize it, and it's been an open-air concentration camp there since 1948. Trump has designs on it to develop it. I mean, that to me is a gross and irresponsible statement to come out of the mouth of the President of the United States. If you want to give him credit, maybe he's playing games with Netanyahu. Maybe he's not. Maybe he likes him. Maybe he doesn't. But he's financing the slaughter of innocent people, and there's no justification for that, and there's no credit to be given for that. There's nothing but condemnation. George, I was surprised at the poll numbers that you read. Those polls are not publicized here in the West. Here in the United States, you can sense a feeling that enough is enough. But you have to get that feeling on shows like yours and mine. You won't get it where I worked for 24 years on Fox News. You won't get it from reading the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or the New York Times. You won't get it from CBS, ABC, NBC, or the BBC. You'll only get it from the alternative media. But I guess it's starting to resonate. Those numbers that you quoted a few moments ago, polls of Americans were extraordinary. 57% opposing this policy. The policy is ruinous for the United States. It has isolated not only Israel, but the United States as international pariahs.
Indeed so, and they are remarkable given the blackout of truth on almost every medium, with the exception of yours, mine, the Grey Zone, and one or two others. You really have to search for the truth about the Israel-Palestine conflict in the US, and in Britain for that matter, though more in the US. And yet now, a clear majority of US adults say they disapprove of the current US relationship to Israel. That is something Trump should pay attention to, unless he's not able to, Your Honor. I postulated, you're his friend, I'm not, I postulated there's something dark about this. It can't just be about previous donations, because eaten bread is soon forgotten, as I'm sure Italian Americans also know, as well as Irish people. These donations are all in the past. They've all been spent. I'm wondering if he's compromised, if there's the Israeli equivalent of, you know, a P-gate tape on Trump that keeps him in the fold, as it were.
Well, the Mossad has a reputation for being extremely effective at controlling people. I would like to think that it is the money angle, not just with him, but with everybody around him, including about 95% of the United States Congress, which receives substantial donations from AIPAC. You know what AIPAC is, of course, as do your viewers and listeners. You did suggest in the segment before you brought me on that his involvement with the late monster Jeffrey Epstein might be held above his head in a way so as to control his behavior. I don't know. I hope that's not the case. That would be a severe and extreme form of blackmail, but you can't put anything past Mossad. Mossad is so devoted to the concept of the apartheid Jewish state that it'll do anything it can to keep the money flowing.
Let's turn, Your Honor, to the Chinese front, because that's what will be grabbing the headlines later tonight and tomorrow morning. Trump's latest, and as I say, it's only the latest because it's developing, as you say, by the half hour, is 154% tariffs on China. China's responded with 180% in retaliation. These numbers become a joke, don't they? Effectively, we're in a state of...
They've actually gone up. They've gone up since we began this broadcast.
Well, there you go. I mean, where is all this heading, Judge?
I wish I knew where it is heading. You talk about alpha males. You have two in Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping, neither of whom is prepared to back down. I am hoping that the three of them will be in Moscow on May 9th to celebrate that day in Russian history, and that the three of them will sit down with their aides and translators and work out some kind of a new reset, a new economic relationship. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, but you have to add to this the rantings and ravings of my former Fox colleague, who's now the Secretary of Defense, who last week in Japan faced China and threatened them and said, don't you dare think about doing anything with Taiwan because we'll be here to defend it. I mean, the military people will tell you, and I'm sure they have, that it is inconceivable that the United States could defend against the Chinese Navy and military if they want Taiwan, and no good purpose is served by threatening China. So you have the threat to China from Secretary Hegseth, and now you have these absurd and ridiculous tariffs. If you want to buy a toaster at Walmart or Amazon in the United States, last week it cost you $25. Now it costs you $100. Now, if you're interested in saving money on the toaster, you're not going to spend $100. And if you're looking for an American-made toaster, you're not going to find one at all. So who is Trump hurting? Trump's hurting what we call Joe Sixpack wearing a red MAGA cap, basically his blue-collar base. That's who he's hurting when he imposes these absurdly high triple-digit tariffs.
Indeed so, and that seems to me, I'm not an economist, but that seems to me the obvious point, that tariffs are going to be a blow to the standard of living of an American working class, which has already suffered so much ever since Clinton and the NAFTA, and the deindustrialization. I mean, once upon a time, the best toasters would have been yours. Now,
yes,
none of the toasters are yours. We'd have been looking at, an Art Deco toaster of the typical American brand, but now that no longer exists. So you're going to have to go without the toaster. You're not going to pay $100 for a toaster that last week was $25. Right. And if you have to, you're going to blame President Trump for it. How are his ratings holding up in this maelstrom?
They're about 45-45, so 45 approval, 45 disapproval, and some brain dead 10% of people have no opinion. The definitive polls come out over the weekend. I don't know what they will show. I don't know if they will show that Trump came to a sense of reason, or that the public thinks that he really didn't know what he was doing in the first place with this imposition of tariffs and then reduction of all of them except on China. The impression that most of us have is that he doesn't get basic economics 101. He hasn't been able to produce a single reputable economist, progressive, libertarian, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, academic, or industrial. No credible economist has supported what he's been doing. And even some of his strongest allies in the United States Senate have condemned it. It's too early to evaluate what he did this afternoon here in the U.S. afternoon by removing the tariffs on everyone except China. But those polls will be reflected when they're taken this weekend.
Now, finally, as an eminent jurist, you're familiar with the concept of habeas corpus. Can you produce the corpse, the body of Joe Biden? Is he still alive? Why haven't we heard anything from him? After all, just a few months ago, he was sharp as a tack behind closed doors and ready for another 4 years in the White House. Now, it's as if he was no longer alive. What can you tell us about him and the party that he led?
The books are starting to come out. The early drafts are starting to be leaked. That even his closest advisors were brokenhearted, to use the phrase of my friend George Stephanopoulos. George is at ABC News and a former advisor to President Clinton, but a very prominent journalist who knew Joe Biden for many years. Brokenhearted at the Joe Biden that they saw in the last year of his presidency. Did any of them ring a bell? No. Did any of them go to Kamala Harris and say, it's time to trigger the 27th Amendment, which would allow her to become acting president in the case of the president's disability? No, they all hid this stuff. They're all going to be embarrassed and humiliated for having done so. But in terms of where is he, I must tell you, in my view, and of course I'm not a physician, he's really incapable of making any intelligent comments today, because we have not heard one word from him since Donald Trump became president, even though Trump has undone much of what Joe Biden did.
So where does that leave the Democrats? With Kamala Harris? Or are they going to skip a generation and go to a younger Kamala Harris, by the name of AOC?
I think the latter is more likely than the former. I don't know if it will be AOC. It might be, even though his track record is terrible, he's very articulate and attractive. It might be the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. It might be somebody that we can't put our finger on them now. Or Donald Trump might just hand this to the Democrats if he keeps plucking people off the streets. This is where I thought you were going when you mentioned habeas corpus, and locking them up without due process. And if he keeps wrecking the economy, he may give the Democrats a dream that they never imagined they would have, which is a really competitive race in their primaries that would produce a really strong candidate.
I could talk with you all night. Judge Andrew Napolitano, host of Judging Freedom, a must-watch. Everyone must follow Judging Freedom. And Judge Napolitano is also a former New Jersey Superior Court judge. You're a gentleman and a scholar. Judge Napolitano, I'm very honored to have had you on the show. Thanks for joining us. Let's take a break. Your calls coming up next. Here again are the numbers. It's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 965522, and the worldwide number 0044203 966 2625. Hit the phones, Jack and Jacqueline. Stay tuned.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Now, you've just heard there, we've had big numbers from China in the past week, and that's amazing if you think about it. We are charting in China. We're still in the top 10 in Singapore, and we've been the #1 English-speaking politics podcast in Nigeria too over the past few days. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. And you can listen to the weekly podcast via the moats.tv website. And once you've listened, please don't forget to leave a review and rate it too. Now, a big hello to Norma, the legend from Bristol tonight. She's watching the show, but she isn't feeling great. She's enjoying MOATS, and I've got to tell you, Norma, from all of us here on the program and all of us who know you in this audience across the world, we send our deepest love and affection to you. Let's go to Blackpool. Who wouldn't on a lovely day like this? It's Walter. He's always worth hearing on the trade war and the tariffs. Go ahead, Walter.
Okay, George, thanks for having me. You mentioned earlier, you asked Judge Napolitano earlier whether there was method in Trump's madness. Well, I think there is on three fronts. Yeah. First of all, when the stock market crashes, I think that the fund managers will pile into the safe haven of Treasury bonds. Now, the result of that, I think, will be that the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates quite considerably. and that will enable Trump to refinance the national debt. Now, that's one aspect. Secondly, farming. Now, retaliatory tariffs will very probably take the form of agricultural tariffs. Of course, the EU, as you know, are a dab hand at that. Yeah? And that will, I think, compel U.S. farmers and U.S. the food producers to concentrate more on the home market, which I think will make prices of foodstuffs drop. Thirdly, in the long term, now the tariffs, I think, will yield a considerable amount of money for the inland revenue. That will enable Trump to raise the threshold for income tax considerably, perhaps even $50,000. Presently, it's $22,000. Some even are talking about raising the threshold to $100,000. Yeah. Now that I think could pave the way for the election of V.D. Vance for the presidency. Now I think that that should be understood, and especially in this country. Yeah. I think our Nobel Prize-winning economist, as Chancellor, should understand that.
Yeah, well, look, my first reaction is that these three hypotheses fall in the bracket of extremely optimistic. And my usual response to them is, if my auntie had a beard, she'd be my uncle. But I promise we'll put these three to the doyen of economists, Professor Richard Wolff, shortly. But I don't believe that any of your hypotheses hold up. The idea that the income tax threshold in the United States could rise from $22,000 to $100,000 could only be achieved if the United States effectively abolished state spending. And this is a state that has just committed itself in the presence of Netanyahu to the very first ever $1 trillion defense budget. That's $1 trillion on the top line of defense. If you add the CIA, add all the three-letter agencies, add all the subterfuges with which the deep state funds American interventions abroad, that $1 trillion level was left behind long ago and should really be accounted as that again. Thirdly, the idea that Trump is currently playing to get J.D. Vance in as president 4 years from now severely understates Donald Trump's personal ambitions. I believe that Trump is still mulling the possibility of illegally seeking to run for a third term. And if he doesn't, it's much more likely that, if only to save the price of the election posters, it'll be somebody called Trump who runs in his stead. But thanks, Walter. Provocative, as always. Now, if you want to leave any comments on the YouTube, just scan the QR code now. Leave a comment, and if I can, I'll read it out. Gregory Wright says, Trump just raised the tariff on China to 125% and lowered all other tariffs to 10%. The stock market is surging. Yes, it wasn't surging this morning or the morning before that, but it is surging now. But as people are fond of saying, at what cost? Nikki A says Vietnam is probably on Trump's tariff list because they inflicted a great humiliation on the USA during the Vietnam War. The US is petty and jealous. Not that Donald Trump had any intention himself of fighting in the Vietnam War, of course, those bone spurs in his ankles, which don't keep him back from the golf course, but certainly kept him out of the paddy fields of Vietnam. Sean Penfold says, Trump does as the Fed central banks tell him. The race to the bottom for our economy is intentional, paving the way for the largest land and mineral grab in history in the US. Neo-feudalism is next. And Robert Marley says, why is Trump acting first and assessing the situation afterwards? His bully mentality makes him unreceptive to advice. Snowman says the world has 8 billion people. Everyone deserves growth and prosperity, not just a select few in the North Atlantic. On line 2 from Florida is Alan on economics. Let's hear it. Alan, go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. Thank you for having me again. I just wanted to point out the fact that we can no longer think the U.S. economy is a capitalistic economy. It's never been a capitalistic economy. It's a command economy. And as Gore Vidal pointed out, he coined the term, it is socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. And this week has been nothing but a showing, a display of that. And I think it's going to be our job in the next decade or so to amplify the voices of the young people that are being repressed at the moment, and they get it. It's just our generations that still hold on to the myth that this economy was or is a display of capitalism. That's all.
No, it's a very good point and very well made, and we'll be talking to Professor Wolff about that in the second hour. Thanks, Alan. A big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the MOATS.tv website. Benny Clements, Anthony Blackmore, Nuz Hay, and Po Tam. Thank you all for your extreme generosity. I really, really appreciate it. So you can become a MOATS donor tonight. You simply have to, or we'll have to kiss goodbye to the midweek show. If you value 2 shows a week from the mother of all talk shows, and imagine if we had not had a show on a night like this, then you really have to give something. So I can't put it more strongly than this. Every one of you who watches this show, now or later, has an obligation, a moral obligation, to go to the website and leave just $1, £1, or €1. I'm not going to beg, I'm going to place it as your moral responsibility. Simon's on the line from Weaponized News. He's got breaking news on tonight's Trump tariffs. Don't tell me there's been more development, Simon.
Well, Mr. Galloway, greetings to you and to your worldwide audience, including, of course, the esteemed Norma. And it's not so much what has happened, but it's like, does anybody hear the single tree fall in the forest? So the Chinese, displaying a significantly different management style from Donald Trump, have in recent hours put out a white paper explaining in excruciating detail, it's very long and has no page numbers, a very long position statement on precisely the issues that they have with the current state of affairs in US-China economic affairs and trade relations. And in order that your audience can say that they are some of the few hundreds of thousands of people in the world who may actually have heard any part of this or subsequently gone and researched any part of it, bearing in mind that China has made the point that it is the West, and in particular the United States, who have set up the IMF and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization and all these kind of bodies that are implementing the rules-based international order. And this is just yet another example of when they happen to lose one hand in the bridge game that may last all night, they throw a fit and completely overturn the table. So if I may, very quickly, I'll just read the final paragraph of the conclusion of this document so that whilst we're being bombarded by commentary and opinion from Western economists, your audience and yourself, sir, actually know what the Chinese are proposing in writing. Okay, so they have said, and this is direct quote from the document, trade wars produce no winners, and protectionism leads up a blind alley. The economic success of both China and the United States presents shared opportunities rather than mutual threats. The US side is expected to join forces with the Chinese side to pull in the same direction, as pointed out by the two heads of state in their phone conversation earlier this year. Following the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation, the two countries can address their respective concerns through equal-footed dialogue and consultation, and jointly promote the healthy, stable, and sustainable development of bilateral economic and trade relations. And I hope that Professor Wolff had the opportunity to hear that while he was waiting to come on with you, because I think that that's a very, very responsible and reasonable tone put out in writing by the Chinese government today.
Yes, and pigs may fly. The idea that Trump is going to reciprocate with that kind of sober level-headedness presupposes a different Donald Trump to the one we've seen over the last few days, few weeks, and maybe even few years. But thanks for it, Simon. That was the voice from the white paper in Beijing. We'll hear from the master himself, Professor Richard Wolff, Professor of Economics, founder of Democracy at Work, host of Economic Update, and author of Understanding Socialism. He truly is our dean, and we'll be talking to him after a short break. Let me sum up the poll so far. Will Trump get Greenland? 20,500 people have voted. I must say, most people think he will not get Greenland. My answers would be, who cares? And yes, he probably will. But that's not the view of the electorate that is voting in this poll tonight. Let me take a quick break. Then it is the one and only, peerless Professor Richard Wolff coming up.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, with what you might say is extraordinary perspicacity, the mother of all talk shows has one of the world's greatest economists with us this evening, Professor Richard Wolff. Much obliged to you, Professor. You must be in great demand this evening, so I'm grateful to you for your presence. We couldn't have picked a better night for it. Let me begin by asking, as I did Judge Napolitano earlier, Is this just madness, or is there method in the madness? And if there is, you're the man to explain it, I know.
Yeah, excuse me, I think there is method in the madness. I think that this is a Republican Party administration. The only difference between it and what we have seen in the past is that his strategy is to go much, much further. Whereas before you tolerated white supremacists, now you embrace them. Where before you were against the people who wanted to abolish abortion, now you are their leader. Where before you wanted to get more out of your allies, now you punish them to get more out of your allies, and so on and so on. If people want to know what is driving Mr. Trump, probably the single most important thing is a matter of the tax history in this country. In the first administration of Mr. Trump, back in 2017, the only major economic act that he achieved as president was an enormous tax cut favoring corporations and the rich, which he accomplished in December of 2017. It was noteworthy mostly because it came at the end of a 30-year period in the United States during which we had had a redistribution of income and wealth from the bottom and the working class to the people, the 10%, the 5% at the top. Never did those people need a tax cut less, and they got it anyway, because Mr. Trump was taking care of business in the way that the Republican Party always had. But that law that passed that tax cut had a clause in it that it expires this year, 2025, which means that Mr. Trump has a problem. He must do something, because if he doesn't either renew that law, prevent it from expiring, if he doesn't do that, then his supporters, corporations and the rich, will face an enormous tax increase as we go back to what taxes were before 2017. He has to perpetuate that tax cut, which means he has to use his control of both houses of our Congress to get that through. And since he has promised even more tax cuts for corporations and the rich, and a few for the rest of us, he has an enormous problem. We were already scheduled to run a $2 trillion deficit this year, and he now faces a conundrum. How is he going to stop borrowing too much money that the rest of the world is unwilling to lend us? How is he going to do that without taxing corporations and the rich, who will dump him politically if he dares? That's his dilemma. And whether you're looking at tariffs or you're looking at the wholesale firing of public employees, that's what the story is about. He's trying to solve all of these contradictions and having a difficult time. But he's desperate. And if I can underscore anything for your audience in the United Kingdom or beyond, these are not the strategies of some master manipulator. These are the strategies of desperation. We're coming to a very key part of the decline of the American empire, already underway. We lost the war in Vietnam. We lost it in Afghanistan. We lost it in Iraq, and we're losing it in Ukraine. And the consequence of that is a recognition that we cannot continue. And we have so many accumulated domestic problems. What you're seeing is desperation. It's a kind of desperation from the bottom that gives Mr. Trump the presidency. And now it is fueling kinds of behavior whose long-term costs to the United States are incalculable, the risk this guy is taking should make everyone wonder about the future of the whole world.
I think many of us are wondering about that. It's enough to make you believe that we're approaching the end times, I've got to tell you, and it's taken me 70 years to utter that phrase. The desperation of which you speak, producing very desperate measures. I mean, when you are into triple-digit tariffs, with the biggest manufacturing economy in the world, and possibly the biggest economy in the world, though they deny it, but certainly the second biggest economy in the world. The two biggest economies in the world in a triple-digit trade war with each other. I mean, that all sounds a bit dangerous to me, Professor.
Yes, it is extremely dangerous. And we have to be honest, and I say this as an American. I was born here, lived here, worked here all my life. The United States is the initiator. The United States is afraid of what is going on in China, and by that I mean its staggering economic growth. I mean, here is one of the poorest countries in the world a few decades ago and is now a superpower. I mean, that is a model for the mass of the people of this planet who would like to escape poverty and see in the Chinese the most successful effort so far to do that. They have made an industrialization in decades that took the United Kingdom centuries, and the United States a long time as well. But the response of the United States, which could have been and should have been, what have you done that we can learn from? What were the things you changed that enabled you to achieve what so many other countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America wanted to achieve? Instead of that, the strategy has been to try to squash it. The attack on the Huawei Corporation a few years ago, the stationing of the 7th Fleet in the South China Sea, the endless rediscovery of this dead horse called Taiwan. These are provocations now with these tariff wars. It's designed to distract them, to slow them down, to interfere. And the most impressive thing about China is that it's been going on for 15 years and it's clearly not working. And so the response of people which could have been and should have been, let's sit down and work out with the Chinese a way to live on this planet together without coming to the blows that will destroy this planet. Instead of that, they just double down. Mr. Trump's favorite strategy. If it doesn't work, do more of it. If it still doesn't work, do still more of it. By the way, the 125% tariff is not the most outrageous so far. It actually comes second to another one that I want to tell everyone about. In Europe, you can see something called the BYD automobile. I don't know if they have them in England yet, but they have them on the continent. And that's a Chinese company, and that Chinese company is the result of a competition over the last 20 years. Every automobile company tried to produce electric vehicles because they saw that as the next phase of the automobile company. Mr. Musk is famous because he was one of the early achievers, and to his credit, and he's made a fortune out of it. But he didn't produce the best one. The best one, that is the best car quality at the lowest price, is the BYD company. Every engineer who has looked at them says the same thing, Chinese and non-Chinese alike. And that's why it's very, very successful. They just passed Tesla in China as the biggest seller of cars, etc. By the way, it stands for the English words, build your dream, BYD Corporation. Yeah. And we don't have it in the United States, not at all, because Mr. Trump put a 27% tariff in his first term And Mr. Biden raised it to 100% during his term. In other words, trying to stop them, but did it work? No. Has BYD Corporation grown? Spectacularly. This is a failed strategy, but it does look good on television here in the United States. Mr. Trump is smiting the world around. He's claiming we have been the victim of 50 years of cheating. He makes this stuff up. There's no economics to support it, but it is a kind of chauvinistic, nationalistic economics that plays for a while well, but not as the costs. And let me mention a couple because they're so important. Every country in the world and nearly every company is now required to re-strategize and rethink where is it going to locate its warehouses, where is it going to locate production, where can it expect to grow its market, where will it have to suffer a shrinkage of its market. It can't know. Everybody is making decisions and saying, wait a minute, we can't. And we all know in economics what happens if the investing class, the top 2 or 3%, are waiting. That was the lesson of the British brilliant economist Lord Keynes. He explained, if the corporations wait, we get recessions. That's the biggest fear in Wall Street right now, that this crazy policy of tariffs, on again, off again, higher, lower, what it does do is hold back every decision-making capitalist and thereby plunge the rest of us into an economic downturn that could rival the Great Depression because of its globality, because it involves so many. The risk he is taking to further the old Republican Party agenda in this country, and I put aside how it will worsen the inequalities of wealth and income, but merely as a manager of a capitalist system in trouble. This reminds me of a desperate person trying desperate things because he knows that if he doesn't do something, the path ahead all goes down.
It is apocalyptic, as you describe it. They say that war is the continuation of politics by other means. Is this trade war a continuation of war, or a precursor to war, as a paving stone towards war? Might all this turn hot?
I'm afraid the answer is yet. For me, it looks like a precursor. I retain the hope. I'm basically an optimistic character. I retain the hope that as you get closer to the danger, to the explosion point, when a trade war morphs into a hot war, it's already referred to in this country as a second Cold War. Now that the one with the Soviet Union is behind us, we have one with China, and we know how close on occasion we came in the old Cold War. And you know, some of the rhetoric in this country, even the other day, the Chinese response, if you want a trade war, we will fight it to the end. I don't know what the words to the end mean. It's a Chinese choice of phrase, but you can see the United States cannot, in my judgment, and I'm not far from alone, the United States cannot undo or reverse what the Chinese have accomplished. They can't stop what has been going on now for 30 years. The International Monetary Fund, even for the 2024, the last year, which was a troubled year economically, to say the least. But if you look at the IMF, the United States grew faster than any country in Europe at 2.8%. China grew, according to the IMF, 5%. India, 7%. Okay, that gap keeps growing. And there's an understanding in the United States that time is not on our side. And that's a very ominous recognition. I believe it is accurate, but it is an ominous statement unless we get a welling up of opposition that might, if it comes inside the U.S., change the mentality. We've had 3 or 4 days of terrible stock market downturns, and many of the biggest capitalists on Wall Street are letting Mr. Trump know they like his policies, they hope he succeeds, but he cannot pinch them. It's this wonderful example of the people at the top being ready for everybody else to take their medicine or to have a difficult time, but not them. They don't even want 10% of a downturn or 20% in the stock market. Well, if he keeps ruffling the feathers, and boy, is he doing that. I can tell you the labor movement is more active in this country than I've seen it in 50 years. The opposition, this last weekend, we had an estimated 1 million people across the different cities of the United States and in villages and towns, and they all had one basic idea. Stop it, Mr. Trump. Stop it. Whatever you're doing, don't do that anymore. Now, you know, it's not organized. It's not as powerful as it needs to be, but it is very definitely something remarkable this early in a president's term.
So did he blink and drop the whole thing today, with the exception of China? It's quite an exception, of course. Or is this just another zigzag, another maneuver? Is the stock market collapse, which is now leading to a resurgence this afternoon, is it over, or will we have to go through this again the next day and the day after that?
Well, given his performance, I mean, I can't predict the future any better than anyone else, but given his performance, I would be, if I were a betting person, I would be betting on the zigging and the zagging. He has encountered over the last 8 days, it's about accurate 8 days, he has encountered a welling up of opposition I don't think he's ever seen before. And I've never seen it before, and, you know, I have white hair. So I can assure you, he has to do something. He has to make it look like he's zigging or zagging. But again, he's caught in a contradiction. By the very act he just did, he reinforced the uncertainty. Anyone who was making a plan based on these tariffs now has to throw that plan out the window because the tariffs are what? Delayed 90 days. Well, maybe he's changed the delay times, he's changed the amounts, and here's clearly a politician who's in trouble, who's desperate, who may lose in a very short time what he gained. You know, people who come out of nowhere and rise quickly often disappear pretty much in the same way. And he is now at a point, he has to do all kinds of things, but given what his advice has been, given the deeply contradictory nature of what he has already done, I'm at loss to see how he can recover, how he can recoup. And yes, he will make these sudden shifts very hard. You know, you can also see two of his major economic advisors are a man named Peter Navarro, a very strange economist. I'm being as polite as I know how, and Elon Musk. And they were literally just shy of having fisticuffs with one another as they push in opposite directions. Mr. Musk doesn't want tariffs because it'll hurt the profits of Tesla, whatever other reasons he has. Mr. Navarro is, by the way, a great anti-Chinese crusader, and he wants to smite the world in this kind of apocalyptic notion of correcting the cheating that the United States has suffered. unbelievable. We've had a growth of our economy, particularly for the top 10%, we've never seen before. I mean, that's why it's so unequal in the United States now. And to use then the claim we've been cheated for the 25 years of spectacular growth for the rich is an extraordinary basis upon which to have a program that enriches the rich. You have to take your hat off. If I had one, you could take yours off, just to the sheer gall that animates what these people are doing.
I think they call it chutzpah. Let's be philosophical for a moment, Professor. We, alas, both live in post-industrial states. In my country, the Prime Minister just announced today, not a major economic development on the graveyard of tens of thousands of automobile jobs in Bedford, but a new theme park celebrating our previous industrial greatness. You live in a country which is not so far off that, not so far off post-industrial. I get criticized as a reactionary, as someone who's harking back to kind of Soviet Britain fantasy, where we have our own energy, we have our own steel, we have our own industrial base and so on. I'm told that that's for the birds. We have to live in a land of theme parks and casino economics in the city. Is some of this from Trump not the kind of reaction that I myself have? I don't want to go quietly into the post-industrial good night. Is that not partly what Trump is also doing, refusing to go quietly into a future for America where everything that is real is made everywhere else?
Well, I share your view, and I must tell you that here in the United States now, it is Mr. Trump and his people who have, and they get the credit for this, they have changed the mood. Now it is chic. I'm sitting in Manhattan in New York City. It is chic if you talk to people here, and I have many friends who work in Wall Street. Now everyone is talking the way you are. You will not anymore be called a Sovietist or anything like that. Here it is said, quote unquote, here's the language in America. We mistakenly, interesting, they think it's a mistake, we mistakenly hollowed out, they love the phrase, hollowed out our industry, and all we did was finance. You know, everything is Wall Street. Like in your country, everything was the city, London, and the financial arrangements of that. And we somehow shouldn't have done it. But let me give you a cautionary understanding. Every one of the last 10 presidents of the United States, the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas, all of them, came to power running a campaign promising to return manufacturing to the United States, nowadays called reshoring, bringing them back to our shores, having that left. That is a kind of a mantra. Every president of the last 10 promised it. Not a single one of them delivered it. The line of manufacturing is a line that goes down as a percentage of our economy. None of those presidents could do it. The economic forces in the world were much too powerful for those presidents to do much about it. And my expectation, and what history would lead you to want to presume, is that Mr. Trump will not be much more successful. He's trying more extreme measures. That's true. But more successful, I don't think so. And I want to remind people, the reason all of that happened was that European and American and Japanese capitalists made the decision. No one was holding a gun to their heads. They went to China or India or Brazil or any of those other countries because they could pay lower wages, they could get lower taxes, and they knew that the markets were bigger and growing there than they were in Europe or the United States, all of which was true. That's why they did that. And that hasn't changed. And therefore, you're expecting that the theatrical, marginal efforts of this president will be more powerful than what was holding back all the previous presidents and what made those corporations do that. Last thing to drive this point home. Today, I don't know if the news has come to Britain yet, but today, the United States Chamber of Commerce, probably the most important business association in the country, leaked to the press that they are about to file suit in the courts against the sitting president to stop his economic policies, particularly with reference to the tariffs. Now, that's a level of internal opposition a Republican president probably has never seen. These are the companies who put all that money into those factories in China and India and Brazil. And they did it on the basis of shipping that stuff back into the American market as at least a major part of their plan. That's all being threatened now, and they're not happy about it. As I said, as I sit here, Mr. Trump is taking spectacular risks, and the odds are they are going to squash him.
I take my hat off to you, Professor. As always, an absolutely peerless tour of these troubled horizons. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That was Professor Richard Wolff, the preeminent professor of economics in America. I personally think we were jolly lucky to have him as our guest this evening above all. Let me take a quick break, then it's your calls all the way up to Gayatri's social media roundup. Stay tuned. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will Trump get Greenland, yes or no? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. Let's take a call from Massachusetts, where Scott wants to talk about Trump. Scott, welcome. What do you want to say?
Well, George, thank you for having me.
Welcome.
I've been hearing tons and tons of people talking about how they can't guess what Trump is doing. And I think he's had this plan since last year when he was running, but he has something with him now that's giving him an advantage. He doesn't have to sweat so much because he has AI behind him, very smart thinking computers that give you results months ahead of what would take humans to figure out. And I think if you look at it, it works out kind of like a computer flowchart, in that the computer has already worked out how people are going to react based on changing numbers every day. And I think people can relax a little bit if they put their confidence in the fact that a computer's already worked this out. What do you think?
Well, you're showing remarkable confidence in AI and computers. I work on the principle with computers and AI that if you put rubbish in, you'll get rubbish out. And it was a human that had to program them in the first place. And I'm not that confident about most of those humans. So I very much doubt that any computer told them to threaten virtually the whole world with a range of tariffs going from 10% to 45%, and then to boast that everybody was coming to, and I quote Donald Trump, kiss his ass to try and get a free trade agreement with the United States, which was in some cases true, but in most cases not. Even the European Union, spineless amoeba that they are, even they put 25% reciprocal tariffs on the United States earlier today. I doubt if any computer told them to wait till billions have been wiped off the stock market in our own country, your country, and billions in all the stock markets all around the world before completely reversing course and giving a 90-day moratorium on those tariffs. And I very much doubt if any computer told them that the Chinese would back down in the teeth of the kind of ugly, vulgar belligerence that Hegseth and Trump and others in the administration are hurling their way. This shows a profound misunderstanding of the Chinese mentality, just as they earlier completely misunderstood the prevailing culture and mentality of the Iranians. It is a foolish idea that China, which holds all the cards, China dumped another $50 billion in American debt this week, thus blowing a further hole in the floor of its value and making it more difficult for Donald Trump to pay down the debt, which he's going to have to make progress in paying down in this year of 2025. Any idea that China, that the Communist Party of China, that Xi Jinping is the sort of guy you can kick around like his little Emmanuel Macron? That is the kind of stupidity that I pray no artificial intelligence is stupid enough to conclude. Now, a big shout out to tonight's top donors who've been on to the MOATS.tv website since we came on the air. Jafar Sani, Mohammed Hussein, and Jason Higgins. Thank you to all three of you, indeed to all of you who have donated in the course of the show tonight. And again, I reiterate, I need everyone watching this show to give at least $1, £1, or €1. Let's go to Stig in Finland, because he always talks sense. He wants to talk tonight about our beloved public broadcasters. Stig, do we have any anymore?
Yes, I'm here. What now has triggered me in this respect is a program on the Finnish public broadcaster Yle that was sent 9 days ago on Monday the 31st of March. They had in their morning program a huge segment about Ukraine, and it mostly centered around the massacre in Bucha, which they, of course, falsely put the blame on Russia, despite the fact that we know we have this video of the mayor of Bucha who 36 hours after the Russian troops had already left was posing for the media and in a jubilant mood told that now the occupants have left our town and so on, and he forgot to mention anything about that the streets would be filled with corpses of people murdered by the Russian troops. Well, he of course forgot it because there were no corpses in the streets back then, because the murderers came only afterwards. Obviously this Zelensky regime with its Banderite ideology sent their murder forces in only later after the Russian troops had left Bucha. But this was not this was outright lied that it was Russia that had committed this massacre. And what was very, very intellectually dishonest was also that they mentioned in this segment that all the Russians that have been indicted for the massacre, not for the massacre in Bucha, but for war crimes. I mean, Putin and his children ombudsman for having brought children to safety in Russia, and then also Shoigu and Gerasimov and two other Russian generals that have been indicted for attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, energy infrastructure. But none of these indictments from this puppet court, ICC, has been about Bucha, not one indictment. And that is, of course, because also this kangaroo court knows that it was the Ukrainian Nazi forces that committed this massacre and not the Russian troops. And it's very serious when public broadcasters are lying like this. And not only lying, they are also hindering people from telling the truth, not only about Bucha, but also otherwise. I mean, there are both in Finnish and the Finnish broadcaster Yle, as well as the Swedish public broadcaster Sveriges Television and Sveriges Radio, these equivalents of the BBC. They have radio programs where people from the public can call in and have their view on topics that are in the debate. But when I have tried to come through to these programs, and I have done it probably some 30 or 40 times during the Ukraine war, I have not come through once. They don't simply want to hear different opinions.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Stig, calling a broadcaster the equivalent of the BBC used to be a compliment. I never regarded it as such, but most people in the world regarded it as a compliment. Now it's a big insult. If you're the equivalent of the BBC, that means you are the equivalent liar-in-chief in your particular country. RTE, the BBC equivalent in Ireland, is as big a lie machine in Ireland as the BBC is in England and as your Finnish broadcasters evidently are in Finland, and it will be true in all Western countries. I wouldn't be surprised. I think the task for us is to build a wholly independent media. I wouldn't waste my time trying to get through on the telephone to a corrupt lie machine media, which is what we now quite evidently have in the Western world. I wouldn't myself deign to appear upon them, even if they asked me, which they have no intention of doing. I was looking, because it's the anniversary of Mrs. Thatcher's death, I was looking at some videos that came up again on social media of my bristling attack on Thatcher's legacy at the time of her demise. If that were to happen today, no broadcaster, none, would be giving me the opportunity to respond. In the run-up to the Iraq War, 20 years ago, that's all, not 200, 20 years ago, in the run-up to the Iraq War, I was on the national media virtually every single day and often, multiple times in a single day, and often multiple times in a single day in multiple different countries. That's how far we've gone. That alternative voices, like yours, like mine, now have no place on the so-called mainstream media in our countries. We have to accept that. And we have to rapidly build the alternative media that we have and that is represented by this show and by your call from Finland. So cogently and welcome it was. Comments, Torwin says the US-Israel relationship is like giving endless money to a degenerate, violent drug addict that feels entitled to the money and is never thankful. Indeed so. Karen Owens, 88, says, war is the statesman's game, the priest's delight, the lawyer's jest, the hired assassin's trade. These beautiful words, of course, from Percy Bysshe Shelley. Play says, high tariffs preceded the Depression of 1837, the Depression of 1893, and the Great Depression of 1929. 3 times tariffs triggered depressions in American history. Jill Martin says $4 billion a year America gives to the Zionist state, including free healthcare and college. Why, when they have $2 billion in reserves? And Rose Isaac says, as a transgender woman, I have a particularly excellent gaydar. And Pete Hegseth is a flaming closet case if ever I've seen one. You said it, Rose, not me. On line 1, Shujat is in London on economics. Go ahead, Shujat.
Oh, hello there, George. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to say about this Trump tariff that he's put on. Economically, tariffs are always unhealthy. They are for retaliation, which is unhealthy, leads to no competition and leads to inefficiency and incompetence in the world. We reduce tariffs. That's what the WTA was established for. Now, this man is doing it because it fits his ego, I think. He's calling it, saying, kiss my ass. Look at the language he's using against world leaders. He's doing it to make it very personal, that he is everything. America is Trump and Trump is America. That's the impression I'm getting. That's stupid. That's actually stupid. He has a big ego. The man needs to be removed. He will create havoc for the whole world, for his own country. He will reduce America to a third world nation in time to come. The policy he's advocating now, it will roll back on him and make America the third world country in 20, 30 years, I think, down the line. So he's myopic, stupid, I don't know what to say, arrogant to the hilt. And he should be removed as ASAP.
Well, look, it's a brilliant call. There are people who are ass kissers. We both know them. There's a section of people. Indeed, there's an entire industry of S&M in Chelsea and Westminster, visited every afternoon by mainly Conservative members of Parliament, but nowadays you never know, who do like a good beating and are prepared to pay people to give them a good beating. It's la vis anglaise, or le vis anglaise, I never knew which. But the people that applies to are quite easy to recognize and discern, as are the people to whom it doesn't apply. So if, for example, you think that you can use swear words and vulgar language and humiliating diktat, if you do that to the leader of Iran, who's a man of, I don't know what, 90 years old, how much longer is he going to be here in this realm? If you think that a man like that can be spoken to in that way, and that the end result will be what you want to achieve, you are an idiot. If you think, and he doesn't actually do this to Putin, although he verges on it a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, if you think Putin is the sort of man and has paid the sort of price this last 2.5 years, 3 years, if you think Putin is the sort of man and that the Russians are the sort of people that you can bully and browbeat and expect an outcome that you favor, you're an idiot. But you're the biggest idiot of all if you think that you can bully China. Deng Xiaoping said, when Prince Charles, as he then was, made some mildly critical remarks at the time of the handover preparations over Hong Kong, he gave some advice to China, and Deng Xiaoping listened carefully to it and replied, "The days when China took orders from foreign countries are over." And that, my dear, was 30 years ago. In that intervening 30 years, China became an even more super powerful economic, military, cultural powerhouse. The last people in the world you can bully are the Chinese. I'm no China expert, though I am compared to most people, but I've known a lot of Chinese people, and I've known that there is no people on earth that it is less wise to threaten and to insult than the people of China. And that is why I conclude that while there may be some method somewhere in the madness, overall and ultimately, Trump's behavior is just stupid and will backfire spectacularly on the American people. And I personally am very sorry about that, because I wish the American people nothing but good. I love them. I have some of their blood in my veins. I wish them nothing but good. But they have been singularly ill-served by, as Professor Wolff said, 20 presidents past. I'm watching right now with my eldest son the new Apple documentary, Vietnam and how it changed America. So I'm going back that far. I'm going back to the idea that by raining down death and destruction on innocent peasants, women, children in their straw hats, burning down their straw huts, dropping chemical weapons on them, scorching the earth on which they lived, that the idea that that was going to win you the hearts and minds of the world, you have to be an idiot to believe that. And many idiots did. And the same is true of Trump's bosom buddy, Benjamin Netanyahu. The idea that anybody, any sentient being, anyone with a scintilla of humanity in them can be happy watching these two killers cavorting in the White House Oval Office, backslapping each other when their hands are dripping with the blood of innocent people. The idea that that's winning you hearts and minds is for the birds. It's for the idiots. Let's take a quick look at how you can join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Watch this. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Be on the studio wall. Participate in the debate about the greatest issues of our time. This is the place where we tackle the world's biggest problems and offer some of the world's best answers. You can have your say. Write to me at our website at haveitoutwithgalloway.com and join me here in the studio audience.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
It was a great show this week, by the way. You should play catch up with it. A very brilliant and passionate young woman from The Cradle, the excellent Middle East magazine based in Beirut. A young woman that I hadn't met before, but which I very much believe you'll be hearing much more from in the years to come. Talking about a woman that we hear much more from, I'm very glad to say I'm joined by Gayatri in the studio with the social media news roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
I would like to start by honoring a former MOATS Hall of Fame superstar, born today, 9th of April, 1898, the one and only Paul Robeson.
He was our first Hall of Famer.
And superstar he is because he was a film, a stage actor, he was a football player, a bass baritone singer, he was an activist, he was multilingual, an all-round artist. Now, his parents were slaves, but he got into Rutgers College, being the only African-American student, imagine. And he flourished. He went to SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And of course, we all know him for his activism. He was very famously introduced and singing to the Welsh miners in the 20s. He actually also met Albert Einstein, and there they found their mutual agreement, a hatred towards fascism. He was against the Spanish Civil War, and he was invited to the Soviet Union in 1934, where he said the following words: "In Russia, I felt for the first time like a full human being." Imagine, in the Soviet Union in 1934, whereas back at home, he was, just to make a point.
Well, I'm really glad. I didn't know you were going to do that, but Paul Robeson is, in my opinion, not just one of the very greatest Americans who ever lived, but one of the greatest human beings who ever lived anywhere, who ever walked this earth. Apart from all of these accomplishments that you listed there, he spoke Chinese fluently. He spoke Russian fluently. This man was a polymath of staggering virtuosity. As well as being a movie star, he was the Michael Jackson of his day. He was an international recording and movie superstar.
But then he got caught in the McCarthy era, and he was blacklisted, his passport taken away, and so his concert in London at the Royal Albert Hall, which was already scheduled, was cancelled. But he pursued.
I'm glad you added that. He actually conducted the concert to a packed Albert Hall down a telephone line. A telephone dangled from the roof with the phone at the microphone, and he sang. The show always went on with the late and great Paul Robeson. But on that subject, this is also the birthday of the greatest artist of the 20th century, Pablo Picasso.
Yes.
Pablo Picasso, another polymath, a man of staggering political as well as artistic genius, faithful until the end to the idea of progress, opposing to the end fascism in his home country of Spain. That was a picture of Guernica, one of his most famous works, depicting the Nazi bombing raid on the Basque town of Guernica in the north of Spain. So two very important anniversary days.
Yep, exactly. I wanted to move on to Pablo Picasso.
Oh, did you?
So, but obviously you knew that.
That's me in trouble with the audience again.
No, not at all.
Completing your sentences.
It's perfect. I just want to add to that He's obviously he's most influential and the highest selling artist of the 20th century. He has more than 20,000 works, but the Guernica being the most famed. And I just want to remind yourself and the audience that the Guernica did hang in the United Nations in New York, but there was a controversy in 2003 when they had to cover it because Colin Powell and John Negroponte at the time were going to speak in front of it in favor of the Iraq War. So they had to cover it. How unbelievable is that?
So powerful was Picasso's art that the American government demanded it be covered as they tried to persuade the world to rain down the same kind of death and destruction on Iraq that the Nazis had done on Spain.
Exactly. Now, let's quickly wrap up the show by looking at the poll one last time. Will Trump get Greenland? Leonardo says, well, I don't know, but it's 2025 and Greenland is still a colony. So is Guyana, and so are the Falklands. So the only innovation Trump proposed was changing the landlord. And Jan Martin says he, like his predecessors, represent one of the many top talents of an unsavory nature America is known for, that is being delusional. Canada belongs to Canada and the First Nations and the British Commonwealth. Trump will have to fight Britain. That's an interesting angle, yeah? That he has to fight the king to get Canada. That was from Canada.
Bring it on! Revenge for the War of Independence. I just find it all comic. I can't take it seriously. All these US slave governments of both parties in Canada and in Denmark, of both parties, they have not kissed Trump's ass, they've kissed the ass of every American president since the end of the Second World War. And look what Trump is doing to them in return. Now that is the kind of contempt you absolutely deserve when you have no respect for yourself. Why would anybody else respect you?
Indeed. It's fine. So finally then, Theresa Kelly says, his book, The Art of the Deal, should have been called Master of Delusion. And for details, type into your web browser, how many businesses has Trump owned and failed? Or how many bankruptcies has he filed? Soon he will be able to add Greenland to his list of business failures.
Yeah, I mean, there is always that. The character, I mean, you never watched it. You're too young. I watched every episode of The Sopranos. Every episode. I never missed it. I totally loved it and love it still. Maybe one of my top three, certainly, television series of all time. Donald Trump is Tony Soprano. With all his endearing qualities and with all of his faults. I see Donald Trump sitting with his equivalent of Tony's psychiatrist as they try to work out all the daddy issues, the mummy issues, and other issues best left unspoken that make this man exactly what he is. Gayatri, thanks. Chips beckon. I should have had you out for your chips already, but I must take the last call from our good friend Terence in England, in Corby. Let's hear what Terry has to say. Yes, Terence, what do you want to say?
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. First of all, my deepest congratulations to the lady from Bristol, Norma. She gets better. She's a lovely, lovely woman.
Yeah.
Represents the word simplicity for me.
Lovely.
My grandfather was a regimental sergeant major in Dunkirk for almost 9 hours. I have his diaries at home at my sister's attic. And news came to me this week of two serving army people, that's all I can say. They're now telling me in Aldershot, army recruits are allowed to have support dogs to make them feel better and to make them respond better if they feel in a bit lonely. That's the absolute truth. And it's God's honest truth. And my grandpa was a decent, honourable man. He also said that the British Legion did nothing when he rattled tins and get medals for themselves, doing nothing for the people that had gone to fight for Great Britain. No longer great. It's gone a long time ago. And when I heard about the support dogs, I just thought to myself, I wonder what Vladimir Putin would make of people marching together, a flock of dogs in front of people, and then unleashing them on great Russian fighting force. And I was chuckling, and I couldn't help it. And I wanted an opinion on that. And not only that, BRICS is scaring the hell out of Trump, and it's floundered his brain now that he had one. And those points, I think you want to take up the dogs first.
Well, look, beautiful, Terence. I'll leave the BRICS one for another night, if I may. But the woke NATO forces, particularly the European ones, although it's only weeks ago that half the American top military brass looked as if, at least, and I think were, actual transsexuals. They had their own club of transsexual American military officers. So the European Union component of NATO is definitely woker than the Russians are used to fighting. And they wouldn't last long enough to put their lipstick back on if they were in battle against the Russian forces. My paternal grandfather was also at Dunkirk. He was wounded at Dunkirk in the head with a steel plate in his head for the rest of his life as a result of the wound sustained at Dunkirk. So you grab my attention there. How very different were the British Armed Forces then? Both of my grandparents fought in the 8th Army under Montgomery at El Alamein, subsequently, and all the way to Monte Cassino. Without knowing each other, they were in the same regiment under the same great General Montgomery. We had an armed forces to be proud of then, because they were fighting a just war, and they fought it bravely and ultimately successfully. And of course, as I've said here many times, for a short period, but a crucial one, we did so entirely alone. The Second World War would have been over in early 1941 if we had capitulated in the way that the rest of Europe had capitulated, and the future of the world would have been likely very different and darker indeed. So support dogs at the front in Ukraine. I'm not sure how the Russians will react to the sight of that. What I can say is that this has been a pretty special program with two pretty special guests that I think it will travel far and live long. At least I hope so. If you've enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed presenting it, then please spread the word about it. Most people watch MOATS on catch-up. Indeed, within an hour of going off the air now, the audience will have doubled, tripled, quadrupled. So please spread the word to others that you watched a special show tonight and that they should catch up on the various platforms with that show. 23,121 people voted on that poll, and most of you think Trump will not get Greenland. Just shows how I know my audience. I would have been in the minority voting yes. Well, I'll be back, God willing, on Sunday at the same time, in the same place. And I very much hope that you'll join me there, but also that you will bring another member of the audience with you. And go to the website, leave £1, $1, €1. Good night.
It's the mother of all. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.